Welcome to our next story. The Quiet Farm. After a burnout, a man retreats to an isolated farmhouse in the English countryside for peace. But the locals won't talk about the land's past, and the nights bring a silence so thick it screams. He soon discovers a set of ancient burial stones hidden beneath the fields, and something buried beneath them that was never meant to wake. Sit tight, let's begin. The road was long, cracked, and lined with tall hedges that clawed at the side of Martin Greaves's rental car as he crept through the winding countryside. The GPS had died 10 miles back, and the signal was gone. There were no signs, no passing cars, not even birdsong, just an unnatural hush that clung to the land like fog. He had been driving for what felt like hours, and yet the scenery had barely changed. Endless fields of stiff, yellowing crops, ancient trees gnarled into claw-like arches, and the occasional dry stone wall, falling in on itself like forgotten ruins. The farm came into view without warning. It sat on a slight hill, surrounded by a low iron fence bent in places, like it had once tried to keep something out or something in. The house itself was crooked but tall, its white paint peeling and grey, roof bowed, a chimney cracked like a bone. A single weather vane spun slowly despite the windless day. Martin parked and stepped out. Silence, not a breeze, not a rustle. Even the gravel beneath his boots seemed to muffle itself. He was here to disappear. Burnout, his therapist called it. Get away, find quiet, decompress. This place had been offered by a distant relative of his ex-wife. Remote but free, she'd said. No one goes there anymore. You'll have all the peace in the world. It wasn't peace he felt as he approached the door. It was observation. The house watched him. He shook the thought off, pushed open the rusted gate, and stepped onto the porch. The key was under the mat, just like the instructions said. The front door creaked as it opened, revealing the cool gloom of the farmhouse interior. Dust danced in the slanted light. Old furniture sat frozen in time. A grandfather clock without hands. A fireplace stuffed with dried grass. Paintings turned inward to face the walls. Martin coughed, dropped his bags, and flicked the light switch. Nothing. He sighed. Perfect. After opening a few windows, he began unpacking in the main room. It smelled of damp wood and something else, earthy, faintly metallic, like rusted iron left to rot. As evening fell, he found an old oil lamp and lit it. He hadn't noticed the barn before. It sat at the edge of the field behind the house, long and sagging, a line of crooked fence posts trailing into the mist. Martin stared at it through the window. Then the lamp flickered. He turned. In the hallway mirror behind him, he saw himself standing. But the version of him in the glass was still staring at the barn. Even though he had turned away, he blinked, and the reflection caught up. Martin slept badly. The mattress was thin and smelled faintly of old hay. Every creak of the old farmhouse sounded like a footstep, and the silence outside was unnatural, too complete, as though the world beyond the window had been switched off. Sometime before dawn, he awoke with the distinct feeling that something had moved in the room. Not a noise, just displacement. The way one senses a hand reaching for them in the dark. But nothing was there. No animals, no bugs, not even wind. Just that heavy silence and the low creak of old beams above. By morning, a thin mist had rolled in across the land. Martin made instant coffee on a rusted camping stove and stood on the back porch, staring across the empty field to the barn. Something about the way it leaned bothered him, like it wasn't leaning from age, but listening. He decided to walk the perimeter, clear his head. The fields were dead, stalks dry, brittle underfoot. The soil beneath them was cracked like old leather, but it was the silence that unnerved him most. Even walking, there was no sound. His boots made contact, but the earth swallowed every impact. And then he saw it. At the far edge of the property, just before the wild hedgerow swallowed the fence, a circle of stones, perfectly round, flat and blackened, as if by fire. There were no carvings, no markings, but the grass around them refused to grow. The ring was bare. He stepped toward it, and the air changed. He couldn't hear his breath, his pulse. The trees in the distance shimmered, like viewed through heat. And in the center of the stone ring, something shimmered too. Just for a second. A shape. Tall. Watching. Then it was gone. Martin stepped back. His skin felt cold. The barn door was open now, but it hadn't been before. Martin avoided the barn. All day he worked inside, scrubbing mold from the kitchen cabinets, dusting the forgotten corners of the sitting room, anything to distract himself. But his eyes kept drifting to the window, to the field, to the barn door, still ajar. That night, as darkness swallowed the horizon and the mist returned, thicker than before, he lit the oil lamp and tried to read one of the books left in the living room. It was a journal, handwritten, its spine cracked and leather flaking like dried skin. The writing was erratic, scratched deep into the pages, desperate. There is something in the loft. I can hear it crawl. It knows I'm here. The stones opened something, or maybe they sealed it, until I came. Martin closed the book. The sound of footsteps creaked above him. He froze. The attic. He hadn't gone up there, hadn't even found a way. But now the house gave him one. A narrow door behind a wardrobe in the hallway, ajar now, revealed a wooden ladder leading into the darkness above. The air grew colder the higher he climbed. With each rung, the sounds grew clearer. Not footsteps, but shifting, dragging. The kind of movement bodies make when they forget how to walk. At the top, a trapdoor. He pushed it open. Dust spiraled down. The lamp flickered. The loft stretched wider than expected, as if it expanded beyond the bounds of the house. Wooden beams arched like ribs above. Old trunks, broken chairs, and rotting hay lay scattered across the boards. And in the far corner, a figure, hunched, shrouded in what looked like burlap and hair. It rocked slightly, then stopped. Martin's breath caught in his throat. The lamp's flame surged, illuminating the thing. It wasn't facing him, but he knew if it turned, it would wear his face. He stumbled back, nearly falling through the trapdoor. The attic swallowed the light, and he slammed the door shut behind him. All was still, except for the low, dragging thump above his head. He didn't sleep that night. In the mirror across from his bed, the figure from the attic rocked endlessly, even though the room behind him was still. Martin rose with the pale morning light leaking through the mist. He hadn't slept, not really. He sat at the kitchen table sipping lukewarm coffee, listening to the attic above. But it had been silent since dawn. He considered leaving, just getting in the car and driving until he saw another human being. But he didn't move. It was as if the house had him in its palm, and part of him didn't want to leave, not until he understood. He returned to the journal. The thing in the loft speaks when I'm not listening. It comes down sometimes, through the walls, through the floor. There's more beneath the barn, something old, something buried. The barn, of course. Martin grabbed his boots and headed across the dead field. The fog swallowed his silhouette as he moved, until only the creak of the gate and the groan of the barn doors remained. Inside, the air was heavy with the scent of rot and iron. Sunlight struggled to pierce the boards. Dust drifted like ash. Old tools hung on the walls, ploughs, saws, something that looked like a branding iron. But what drew Martin forward was the trapdoor in the floor. He hadn't seen it before, but now it was obvious. There was no lock, no handle, just a square cut into the wooden planks, perfectly centered. He pried it open. Stairs led down into the earth, rough, hand-dug, lined with stone and root. Martin hesitated at the top. The air that rose to meet him was damp and cold, but not musty. It smelled new, like a place freshly opened. He descended. Each step was a breath held, each second stretched. At the bottom, the corridor opened into a chamber. Earthen walls, a floor of packed dirt, and in the center, a figure. Not a person. A shape made of bundled hair, burlap, and old clothing. Propped like a scarecrow, but too detailed, too intentional. Its head was made of mirror shards and reflected in them. His face, but not as it was now, as a child, as a teenager, as a man, all at once. He backed away. A whisper drifted through the chamber. "Welcome home." And from behind the mirrored figure, a second pair of eyes opened. Not glass, not his. Something older, something watching. Martin rose with the pale morning light leaking through the mist. He hadn't slept, not really. He sat at the kitchen table sipping lukewarm coffee, listening to the attic above, but it had been silent since dawn. He considered leaving, just getting in the car and driving until he saw another human being. But he didn't move. It was as if the house had him in its palm, and part of him didn't want to leave, not until he understood. He returned to the journal. The thing in the loft speaks when I'm not listening. It comes down sometimes, through the walls, through the floor. There's more beneath the barn, something old, something buried. The barn, of course. Martin grabbed his boots and headed across the dead field. The fog swallowed his silhouette as he moved, until only the creak of the gate and the groan of the barn doors remained. Inside, the air was heavy with the scent of rot and iron. Sunlight struggled to pierce the boards. Dust drifted like ash. Old tools hung on the walls, ploughs, saws, something that looked like a branding iron. But what drew Martin forward was the trapdoor in the floor. He hadn't seen it before, but now it was obvious. There was no lock, no handle, just a square cut into the wooden planks, perfectly centered. He pried it open. Stairs led down into the earth, rough, hand-dug, lined with stone and root. Martin hesitated at the top. The air that rose to meet him was damp and cold, but not musty. It smelled new, like a place freshly opened. He descended. Each step was a breath held, each second stretched. At the bottom, the corridor opened into a chamber. Earthen walls, a floor of packed dirt, and in the center, a figure, not a person. The cold didn't follow Martin back into the house, but something else did. He locked the front door. He locked the back door. He even stuffed towels under the doors and windows like a man fending off a storm. The journal sat open beside his half-empty cup. He read and reread the entries until the ink swam. None of it explained the mirrored effigy or the second set of eyes. It is not a ghost. It is older than ghosts, older than the farm. It was buried by those who came before and forgotten by those who live now. That evening, Martin started to dream. He was a boy again, maybe 7 or 8, standing in the dead field behind the house. But the sky was black, pulsing like a living lung. The barn was gone. Instead, there was a massive tree, leafless, rotted, and split down the middle like a wound. From within it, hundreds of whispers echoed. He walked toward it, compelled. Inside the hollow trunk, he saw a face, his own, eyes gouged out, mouth sewn shut. He woke with a scream, heart pounding. The house was silent again. Over the next few days, the air inside the farmhouse changed. Warmer at night, colder at dawn. The mirrors began to distort his reflection. At first subtly, his eyes looked a touch too large. His smile didn't quite match his lips. Then worse. His reflection would mouth words when he was silent, tilt its head independently. One morning, Martin found muddy footprints on the kitchen floor, child-sized, leading from the front door to the hallway mirror, and stopping there. Determined to understand, he returned to the barn. The trapdoor was closed again, but this time it opened with ease. He descended with a flashlight. The effigy was gone. In its place, carved into the dirt walls, were runes, old, Celtic-looking spirals and lines that shimmered faintly when his light passed over them. At the far end of the chamber, a new tunnel had opened. He followed it, ducking low. The earth pulsed, not literally, but the deeper he went, the more he felt it. A presence, enormous and ancient, pressing against the tunnel from all sides. Then he heard humming, a lullaby, in a child's voice. He stopped. The flashlight flickered. A figure crawled toward him in the dark, child-sized, wrapped in burlap, just like the effigy. Its face was his, but with no eyes. "Are you the next?" it whispered. He turned and ran. The walls groaned. Something brushed his back. The tunnel behind him seemed to collapse, but he reached the chamber and climbed out just as the earth sealed itself shut. He collapsed in the barn, gasping. Outside, the sky had turned red. Back in the house, Martin noticed something new on the mirror. Scratched into the surface, deep and deliberate. "You cannot leave. You were planted here." He touched the mark. Blood beaded from his fingertip. That night, as he stared out the window, he saw them. Figures in the fields, dozens, motionless, watching. Wearing masks made of burlap and bone, waiting. Martin awoke to the sound of creaking wood, not the usual groans of an old house settling. These were rhythmic, deliberate. He rose slowly, joints stiff, and crept into the hallway. The mirror was covered in condensation. 3 new words had appeared in the fog. "They are sewing." He wiped the glass. Nothing behind him. Yet the floor beneath his feet felt wrong, soft in places, like the boards were breathing. He stepped carefully into the living room. The front door was open. Outside, the figures had moved. They now stood in a ring around the farmhouse, hands clasped, facing inward. Their burlap masks stared blankly. At their feet, the soil had cracked open, and pale roots writhed just below the surface like worms in black earth. He shouted. No reaction. He ran back to the barn. The trapdoor was gone, just packed dirt now. He dug with his bare hands, but the earth had hardened, like stone. He collapsed back, breathing heavily, then noticed something scrawled across the inner barn wall. The harvest must be tended. He ran to the house, turned on the taps. Only black sludge spilled from the pipes. He opened the fridge. All the food had turned to rot overnight. The mirrors, all of them, now showed something else. The farmhouse, but in ruin, burnt, overgrown. The fields drowned in vines and crawling shapes. He saw himself in one of the reflections, tied to a post, mouth sewn shut, still blinking. He stumbled away, knocking a mirror to the floor. It didn't shatter, it pulsed. That evening, he found a note wedged under the bedroom door. The handwriting was unfamiliar, angular, precise. Go to the root cellar. There was no root cellar, or so he thought. He searched until dark, pulled back the old rug in the corner of the kitchen, and there it was, a hatch he'd never seen. The hinges groaned as he lifted it. Stairs descended into pitch. He lit the oil lamp. The air down there was dry, dustless, like something had sterilized the place. Rows of shelves lined the walls, but not with canned food, with jars. Jars filled with teeth, hair, tiny bones, every jar labeled with a name, and one read, Martin Greaves. He dropped it. It didn't break. The lid was sealed tight. He turned and saw a figure standing at the base of the stairs. It looked like his mother, but she'd died 10 years ago. "Come back to bed, sweetheart," she said. He fled. He tried to leave, packed a bag, grabbed the keys, ran to the car. It wouldn't start. When he looked up, the rearview mirror showed the back seat. It was full of burlap-faced figures. He screamed. The car horn blared on its own. Outside, the figures began to move. Toward him. They were harvesting. And he was the seed. The farmhouse seemed to grow colder by the hour. The mirrors, now pulsing softly, reflected rooms that no longer matched their real counterparts. When Martin passed the hall mirror, he caught sight of himself sleeping, though he was fully awake. In the kitchen, the broken mirror lay on the floor, still intact, still pulsing. He wrapped it in a towel and shoved it under the sink, but it vibrated faintly, like it was breathing. The note appeared again. Same handwriting. Look under the floorboards, beneath the hearth. He hesitated. The fireplace hadn't been touched in decades. But something in him, a compulsion beyond fear, forced his hand. He moved the old fire grate aside and began prying the boards loose. Beneath them, he found a hollow space and a wooden ladder descending into yet another tunnel. It led into a stone-walled chamber lit by a flickering, sourceless glow. And in that room, effigies, dozens, each one shaped like a person, some small, some tall, all made of wood, burlap, roots, bones, and mirror fragments. They lined the walls in a wide circle. In the center, a hole, circular, perfect, bottomless. Martin approached one of the effigies. It wore his clothes. Its mirrored face showed not his reflection, but a stranger's, something tall and thin and pale-eyed. Then all the effigies twitched. Once, he staggered back. A voice echoed up from the hole. "Give yourself, or be taken." Suddenly the temperature plummeted. Frost coated the walls. The roots in the ceiling writhed, stretching downward, reaching for his shoulders. He ran, climbed the ladder, sealed the floor. But when he turned around, he was no longer in the kitchen. He stood in a room identical to it, but decayed, rotted, overgrown. One of the alternate reflections had become real. He screamed, but the house swallowed the sound. Martin ran from the kitchen-turned nightmare, slamming every door behind him. The decay, the vines, the rot, none of it should have been real. Yet when he returned to the living room, nothing had changed. Or rather, everything had changed to match that mirror world version. The walls were warped and weeping. The floorboards were covered in ash. The air smelled of sulfur and wet roots. The mirror above the fireplace now reflected only the black hole from the effigy chamber. The house was becoming the hollow. He could feel it in his bones. He tried to light the lamp. It hissed, went out. The night outside was a colorless void, thick with something that wasn't mist, but moved like it. And from the field came a sound. Drums, slow, steady, like a ritual heartbeat. Martin pressed his face to the window. The figures were circling the house now, not walking but gliding. Their masks were smeared in red. Their hands were raised. The rhythm they moved to echoed not in the air but in his skull. Boom, boom, boom. The barn was lit from within. Red light, like fire. But there was no smoke. He turned back from the window and found the figure in the hallway. It was him, or the version that had been in the mirror. But its eyes were hollow, its mouth sewn shut, its arms outstretched. "Leave me alone," Martin screamed. It didn't move, didn't blink. Just stood, swaying slightly. Then, from behind Martin, a voice whispered, "You never left. You were always here." He turned. The house had no walls anymore, just black, just root, just the pulsing throb of something beneath the surface, waiting to rise. And above, through the collapsing roof, a red harvest moon hung full and low, bleeding light across the field. He heard the word again, from all around him, in dozens of voices. So, Martin dropped to his knees. The floor was no longer wood. It was soil, warm, wet. It accepted his hands, his arms. He was being planted, and he could feel something else, beneath him, rising to meet him. Something hungry, something home. Martin awoke beneath the soil, but he could breathe. Not air, not really. It was more like memory, thick and stale, seeping into him from the dirt itself. His fingers twitched. They felt heavy, coated in loam. When he opened his eyes, the world was murky and dark, with faint amber veins pulsing in the distance. He was underground, no walls, no ceiling, just endless earth. He pulled himself upward, gasping as he emerged into twilight. The farmhouse was gone. So was the barn. In their place was a field, enormous and empty. Only stumps and brittle stalks remained. But the red harvest moon still hung above, casting a light too thick, too saturated. Everything shimmered with that unholy crimson. Martin stood. His clothes were torn. His skin felt wrong, dry and flaking, as though the soil had left something behind. When he looked at his arms, thin roots clung to his veins, pulsing with his heartbeat. At the center of the field was a massive sinkhole. Not like before. This one breathed, in and out, a windless, rhythmic pull of the earth. And from the edge of the field they came, the effigies. But now they walked, limbs bending in wrong angles, mirrors fused to their faces, dozens, hundreds, all closing in. Martin stumbled back. Then a voice clear and cold rang out across the land. "You were always meant to be the mouth." One of the effigies stepped forward. It held something in its hands, a mirror, small, cracked, etched with runes. Martin looked into it and saw his own eyes, glowing red, pupils gone, roots where veins once were. He dropped the mirror. It cracked further, but didn't shatter. The soil around the sinkhole trembled. The hole yawned wider. Inside it, not darkness, but a massive open mouth made of writhing roots and earth and bone. Teeth like pale stones. Tongue of wet moss. Martin fell to his knees again. "Why?" he asked, though he knew no answer would make sense. "To feed what sleeps," the voice said again, "so that it may wake." The harvest moon flickered, and the ground opened beneath him. He didn't fall. He was taken. Darkness swallowed Martin. But it wasn't death. He floated in a root-tangled void, suspended in soil and memory. Every thought fractured into whispers. Every breath drew not air, but time. He remembered things that had never happened. A woman's hand brushing his cheek. Children laughing in the distance. A storm rolling over black hills. And always the harvest. Then light, faint, greenish gold, not above him, but within. Martin opened his eyes again, if these were still eyes, and found himself inside the farmhouse, whole, new, but wrong. The walls were the same, the wallpaper peeled in familiar patterns. The kitchen still smelled of coffee, but the house was alive. Veins pulsed through the floorboards. The fireplace breathed. The shadows in the mirror didn't move with him. A knock came at the door. He opened it. A man stood there, duffel bag over his shoulder, dusty from the road. "Hey," the man said. "You must be Martin. I'm Jacob. Realtor sent me to help clear the place out." Martin smiled. "Of course. Come in." He stepped aside. The house hummed, and beneath the floor, the roots stirred. Far below, in the breathing soil, the old shape curled around the void. It pulsed. It fed. Martin had not been consumed. He had been grown. He had become the caretaker, the mouth, the seed that now bore fruit. And as Jacob crossed the threshold, the walls trembled in satisfaction. The quiet farm had another mouth to feed.